This is part 4 of a set of 5 videos recording my first PC build. I don't do any installation in this video, but I unbox the power supply and I go through the selection of all the cables we need for the build. The power supply comes with an extensive set of cables. The power supply itself is well packaged and protected to avoid damage. The cooling fan inlet is at the bottom, and one side of the power supply has all the connectors. The exhaust is at the rear. Also at the rear is where the main power cable connects, and there's an on-off switch for the power supply. There's a separate on-off switch for the fan if you want to turn that off but leave the power supply on. This is a list of all the contents that came with the power supply. These components cover many options and not all are needed for our build. So next, just to work out where all the cables will go, from the English version of the manual that I downloaded, this is the layout of the motherboard seen from the other side, so motherboard looking this way. So the power supply for the CPU, it's the motherboard connector, USB connector, connectors for the disk drives, and then some connections for the front panel LEDs and switches, USB 2 connector and the audio connector. So I tried to work out where everything will go and which cables we need, and where I will run them. There are some fixing points here for cable connections so that we can tie the cables down. So I think I worked out this set of cables, which I'll go through one by one. So this is a CPU cable. I have an 8-pin and a 4-pin connection on the motherboard, and I think I only need to use the 8-pin connection. It's not necessary to use the other one. This is split into 2, but it makes an 8-pin when you join it together, so I'll just be using this for the CPU. If I just had a 4-pin connection, I would just use one side. Just need to be sure that you use the correct side. There is a little pattern of square and rounded connectors, so if you get the pattern right, it should only fit in the correct socket. So this for the CPU. For the motherboard power, I should have said CPU connector will be up here, so I'll run this from the power supply up this side through here. Try to keep this tidy up this side. For the motherboard, two pieces go to the power supply, and then I'll run the cable up through here to the motherboard connector here on the other side. So this cable will run like this. Okay, for the graphics board there are a few options. This type of VGA cable that has multiple connectors, the graphics board has an 8 pin and a 6 pin, so I could in theory just use one cable. This one is split but makes an 8 pin, and then just use the 6 here, and I could power the graphics card like that. But I read that it's better if you've got two connectors to use two cables, so I'm not going to use this cable. I'm going to use two of these cables which go from the power supply to a split 6-2. So in the 8 pin socket I'll use this one, making the 8, and in the 6 pin socket I'll use a separate cable just using the 6, so I'll have two cables. And the graphics card connector comes out around about here, so I'll run the cables up and then through here for those two cables. And then finally the hard disk cables, I think I'm okay to just use one cable and daisy chain like this, so I'll use one for each, and then this will run just from the power supply. And then there are a couple of connections from the motherboard for the SATA. Will be the other two connections here, and then they'll go up and connect to the board here. Then all the front panel connections and the LEDs, the cables will come through here. I'll run them down here through the bottom slot here and to the connectors that go along the bottom. Just one will go through here. The USB 3 will go through here and the others will go through here. That's the plan.